Oh, for fuck's sake. Anyway, hi guys. Yeah, so I'm resurrecting the Gayle Talks Sh channel to tell you this story because I mentioned it on Twitter and then put up a poll, and I gave the poll 15 minutes, and I've had a couple of drinks because I had, like, literally the biggest job interview of my life today. So, fuck it. Let's talk about my sister. So, real quick, first of all, it is 9:45 on a Thursday evening. I would not usually be this put together, but job interview. So I'm wearing, like, the good lipstick. This is Maybelline Ink Matte, which I have literally had a full plate of pizza while wearing this lipstick, and it doesn't go away. I put it on at, like, 2 o'clock. It has not moved. I love it. Highly recommend it. It's like $8 to $12, depending if you can find it on sale. Anyway, so the reason I asked people if they wanted to hear a story about my sister was because a couple of months, I think it was a couple of months ago, I honestly don't remember because 2020 means nothing. My mother called me and told me that someone she worked with has tested positive for COVID, and my mother works in a very small office, and so I was very concerned because my mother had tested negative on the rapid test, but I knew that the rapid test was not as accurate as the test that takes a couple of days, and so I basically asked my mother, please don't go into work, please don't put yourself in danger. Please don't put Dad in danger. They're both in their late 60s. Dad has some health issues. And so I was very, very concerned. And I made a point to just stay... I didn't want to be rude to my mother. You know, I wanted to make my case and do the best I could to make it clear how concerned I was about her need to still go to the office while not being able to say 100% that she did not have COVID. And my mother informed me she was still going to go to the office. And my mother does a job that includes a lot of work around the election, and this was right before the election. And so I understand her need to want to be there as someone who does a lot of work with the election, but also, I felt that all the things that she was talking about in terms of what she needed to do could be handed off to other people who had not been exposed. Or if they had been exposed because they shared the same office with my mother, did not have someone high risk in their own home. My dad is high risk. So I said all these things to my mom. My mom said she would think about it. And I could tell from the tone of her voice that she had already made up her mind, and that was all I could do. You know, I made my case, and she had to make her own decision, and that's what happened. So because I was frustrated and scared and concerned, I went onto Twitter, and I let my anger be a lot more open on Twitter than it had been with my mother, because I knew that being outright angry with my mother was not going to be a useful thing for the conversation I wanted to have. Being very angry, which I was, quite honestly, but being very outwardly angry was not going to actually get us to a conversation that was going to be useful. It was better that I sort of constrained myself and really was careful about my language, whereas I went on Twitter and I sort of blew up because I needed to get that out of my system. Because I was really fucking stressed about this, because my parents are in their 60s and this might kill them. And I did this on my fandom Twitter, which is where this is going to be linked, so you all know me on my fandom Twitter. I have a main Twitter that, honestly, since I got fandom Twitter, has seen less and less use, just because it turns out I have, like, the energy for one Twitter. And on fandom Twitter, I gave myself early on the space to just be fucking chaotic. Whereas on my main Twitter, you know, I expect that that's what people find if they Google my name. I expect it's what people find if they're looking for my crochet stuff. And so, you know, I don't want to talk about dick sucking quite so often on that Twitter because my job and my crochet is not about dick sucking as like a sport. So anyway, I tell you all of this because I have the main Twitter, which I've had for years and years. And then I have my fandom Twitter, which I've had for 2 years. And so one of the reasons I chose to use my fandom Twitter to kind of get some of that anger out is because it's a much safer space in terms of like, I don't expect, you know, my workplace to see it. I don't expect people I only kind of vaguely know to see it. Like, it's a lot of people in fandom. And I do have real life people who know me, you know, here, who also follow my fandom Twitter, but they also know me on the level of like, I had to keep my shit together and not yell at my mother, but now I'm going to yell on the internet because, like, I got to get these feelings out somehow. So that's what I did. It was a tweet series of, like, I don't know, 8 to 10 tweets at the most. Like, it was not, like, an epic. I was pissed off. I felt that my mother was choosing her feelings of importance over her career more than my father's health and her own health. And I let it loose because I needed to let it loose somewhere. And what happened was, my sister, who I had not mentioned in any way, shape, or form in this anger storm of tweets, made a Twitter account to yell at me about being a bitch. And here's a couple of things. First of all, I'm not going to tell you my sister's name because it's not fucking important. Second of all, this is not the first time she's done this to me. So she popped up and tried to come from my throat, and I haven't had fucking patience for that in my entire goddamn life. I sure as shit don't have it now. Like, I am allowed to be angry. I am allowed to be displeased. I am allowed to choose to speak to people in a certain way about something and then have a way to sort of let the rest of those other emotions come out. I am not in the wrong to be angry about this. Because I am allowed to be angry about things. Fucking period. But my sister didn't like that I was angry about things because this is what she does. And so she pops up and is like, how dare you say these things? You know, they're doing X, Y, and Z. And my response was basically, why are you doing this to me? You did this 15 years ago and it was fucking weird. It's still fucking weird. And I did say go to get some fucking therapy, which I don't like to diminish the importance of therapy as someone who has greatly grown from it and knowing so many people who have also greatly grown from it and knowing the effort it takes to just go to therapy. Like, I spent years being like, I should be in therapy. I should be in therapy. I should be in therapy. And then I was finally like, okay, now I'm going to go to therapy. And it's a huge fucking game changer. But, like, I had no other answer. Because, like, 15 years ago, and, like, my numbers might be a little iffy because I'm not going to go back through an absolute fuck ton of emails, and I might not have access to some of those emails anyway, because this might have been on my Yahoo account, which is a very old-fashioned sentence. So, I don't know, let's say 15 years ago. I had a live journal. We all had live journals. And I had a live journal that was just about everything. In the same way that my Twitter is sort of about everything. In the same way that my Tumblr was about everything. You know, it just was a place where I would sort of throw everything at the wall and see what happened. And I had people who would talk to me about what I was posting about, whether it was, you know, super serious emotional shit or just like, you know, whatever. And I had that live journal for a long time. And one day, out of the blue, I believe I got a comment from my sister before I ever got an email. So the thing you need to know is that my sister and I had a history of not getting along for a long time. And I can give you my personal view on it in terms of like the psychology of being abused kids and all of that shit, but basically what happened was we got to a point where everything I did she thought was wrong, and everything she did I thought was wrong. And so we were really at each other for a number of years. And there was a period of time, and I fully accept blame for this, where I'd poke her with a stick just to piss her off because I thought it was funny. And looking back, it wasn't funny. It was this weird, fucked up coping mechanism of having been traumatized and having the person who was also traumatized along with you having such a different view of what happened to you that I didn't understand until I went to therapy what had actually happened between us. And so I thought she was being purposefully obtuse about what we had gone through in order to be a bitch to me. And that's not what happened. What happened instead was that we had different reactions to the abuse that we both went through. And we sort of split in different directions about how to deal with it. And that led to later issues in being able to communicate about how we dealt with it because we had a real big split on one of the people that abused us. Just flat out. And I don't want to say more than that because it's not, I can tell you the story of my own abuse, but I don't want to go into the details of her take on things. Because I don't think I'm incorrect with my theories, but it's not my story to tell. And by the way, a few years before this, I wrote a story about dealing with the aftermath of, this was a nonfiction piece I wrote. It was dealing with the aftermath of the abuse I suffered at the hands of our biological father that I believe she suffered in the same way. But again, we split on how we dealt with it. And I wrote a nonfiction piece about dealing with all of that I felt was very honest on all sides, and also was not about me being the hero in the situation. And it caused a lot of friction. And at the time, I couldn't understand why, because it's not her story, it's my story. But I look at it now and I understand that I was telling my story and she was very much a part of it. And that's a much stickier situation than saying this is my story, because there comes a point when you're dealing with stories like this where you're not the only one in the story. And I still maintain that I was very truthful about our relationship at the time and how we viewed things. That doesn't mean that I made the best choices emotionally in terms of getting, like, that was published. Okay, that went into, like, it was not a big magazine, but it went into a magazine. Anyway, I'm just trying to give you some background on this. So what happens is I have this live journal, and I use it for all sorts of things, and one of the things that I discussed on this live journal, amongst everything else, was fuck it, like, she knows this, and I'll explain why she knows this. I have never liked any of my sister's boyfriends or husbands or partners. She had a boyfriend through most of high school. They took off together when they were 18. She met her first husband before breaking up with her boyfriend. She met her second husband before divorcing her first husband. And I don't mean in the sense of, like, they were separated and living separate lives. All right? And it is what it is. But the thing is, you know what? Fuck it. She knows it. I've said this to her face. I've said it to my parents. I don't like her husband. I think he's a piece of shit. I think he's an emotionally abusive piece of shit. And, I don't like him. I've never liked him. I've never pretended to like him. I wasn't a huge fan of her first husband, quite frankly. I wasn't totally a fan of her boyfriend. And I told her these things as they happened. Although, once I realized that she didn't give a shit about my opinion about her boyfriend or her husband's, I stopped telling her directly, but I never pretended to, like, make an effort to be friends with these people, especially her current husband, who, by the way, I have told to his face, I don't like him. So, like, I'm not over here, you know, blowing shit up. I've been very honest about this. So, this was in the early day, like, they'd been together a couple of years, and I had written some posts about how I thought he was a piece of shit. And, what happened was, I guess I finally posted something that was the last straw for her, so she created a LiveJournal account so she could yell at me and tell me I was being a bitch and it was none of my business and how dare I talk about these things. And my response was basically, why the fuck are you reading it? Why are you reading it if it bothers you this much? I'm not using your name. I'm not giving any information about who you are as a person. Or emailing me. And when she emails me, she attaches at least a dozen screenshots she has taken of my LiveJournal over more than 2 years, where I have been saying stuff that I felt was very, very accurate about her husband and about herself. And I saw that, and I realized there were literally two options to what just happened. Either she just found out I had a LiveJournal and had done this, like, huge deep dive background reading on it, screen capping as she went, or she's been reading it for a while and screen capping as she went so that she could have all of this waiting to, like, throw at me. And I really do think it was the second option. So one of the things that she had screen capped was me discussing my experience being abused by a family member. And she accused me of making up the story. And I said, I'm not making up the story. It happened. I didn't talk about it when I was a kid because literally I blocked it out of my mind because it was the only way to deal with it. It happened to me. It was horrible. I have nothing to apologize for in telling my story. And she never responded to that. Ever. Not in an email, not in person, not in a phone call, not nothing. She has never responded to that. And that was the moment that I basically just was done. Because I'm not asking you to, you know, she's coming into the situation, she's reading all this shit that, like, I wasn't handing out my LiveJournal address to my parents. I literally don't know how she found it. I assume I forgot to log out on the family computer at one point when I was home for a visit. Like, that's probably what happened. But she found it, and she read it, and she kept reading it, and then she blew up at me, and I told her to go fuck herself, because go fuck yourself. I didn't hand you the information on this and, like, you should read this, because because fuck you. I just was doing my thing. So, after that, quite frankly, I spent a couple of years still being a complete cunt to her. I would poke at her verbally to make her mad because I thought it was funny. And I realized after a while that it wasn't funny. It was mean. I was being a shithead by doing that when I could just fucking leave it alone. I could just leave it the fuck alone and not do that. And it would be better in general because even though I had convinced myself it was a very funny thing I was doing, it was actually incredibly draining emotionally. It was a real shitty thing I was doing to myself as well as to her. Like, I'm not looking to, like, score points with her, but I don't want to be a shitty person. And what I was doing was shitty. So I stopped. I remember making the decision to stop because it wasn't achieving anything. There was no goal to it except to be an asshole, and I don't want to be an asshole. So I stopped. And what happened was, she kept poking at me, even after I stopped poking at her. And at one point, I remember sitting in my parents' dining room, I fully admit saying, I was a total cunt. I shouldn't have acted like that. I should not have pushed you. I should not have been a dick about it. I apologize for those actions. They were wrong. And then I honestly don't remember if I was asked about the feelings I wrote on my live journal or if I volunteered them. I don't remember how it happened, but I do remember saying I thought all of that shit was under lock where you couldn't see it because I felt like that was a level of intimacy about myself that I did not want to have the public know. And so I'm sorry that it was public. I don't regret anything I said. That did not go over well. Because I clearly was supposed to apologize across the board for everything I had ever said that was remotely negative about our relationship or about her husband, and I'm not gonna fucking do it. It's been a fucked up situation for a long time. That's fucking fine. Sometimes it is. And sometimes what happens is that, like, you realize it's fucked up and you do your best to make amends. And one of two things can happen. One, you admit where you fucked up, you stand by what you still believe, and you can grow beyond that. You don't have to become the best of friends. You don't have to become buddy-buddy, but you can grow beyond it because there is an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, which I did do. Both an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but also I was shitty. I was fucking shitty. Or two, the person to whom you acknowledge your shitty behavior and apologize for your shitty behavior doesn't like that you refuse to renounce everything you've ever said that they have decided is shitty of you because you stand by what you fucking said. And that's what happened, is I was sorry I had been shitty and poked her into arguments. I was never sorry that she read my live journal because who fucking asked you to? You came and found it. Like, I didn't invite you over here. You came and found it and decided it was something you needed to read so you could be mad at me, so go fuck yourself. And so that's exactly what happened on Twitter, is like, I literally have no idea how she found my fandom Twitter because I haven't told my family about it. Like, I'm not ashamed of it, I just don't think they want to see how often I talk about dick sucking, which I think is fair. But she popped up and pulled the same shit she pulled 15 years ago, calling me all sorts of names and trying to convince me I was in the wrong for having reactions to life because she didn't like my reactions. And quite frankly, if you're watching this right now, my dear sister, go fuck yourself. Nobody knows who you are. Like, literally, she tried to accuse me of defamation at one point because of that nonfiction essay I told you about. I changed all the names. She and I don't even share the same name. I legally changed my name years and years ago. We don't share the same name. You cannot prove, unless you have to have some like third level information to be able to prove that we're even related. Like, I didn't put her address out there. I didn't put her name out there. I didn't name the rest of her family. I didn't do any of that shit because I know that that is wrong and gross. And I now know, like, looking back on some of my live journal stuff, again, I do not regret anything I wrote there because I stand by it 100%. I regret that I didn't realize that it wasn't all under lock because I meant it to be. Not to spare her, but because I do think there are certain things that you only kind of want to discuss within a group of people. You know, within a group of, like, trusted people. And I saw nothing wrong with being angry about my mother's choices on my fandom timeline because, like, who the fuck in my family's gonna read that? This is a safe space I've curated for myself, and there are many people in my real life who know about it. But I'm not handing out cards with the address asking the family to come and see it. And, like, the thing is, 15 years of life experience has taught me that I didn't invite this on myself. I didn't ask for this shit. I didn't ask for this shit when she showed up on my live journal. I didn't ask for this shit now when she showed up on my Twitter. I didn't ask for this shit every time she tried to be a bitch to me. Even if I was poking at her with a stick. That is my fault and my responsibility. Her responses are her fault and her responsibility. And here's the truth of what happened. I stopped being a raging cunt to her, and she kept being a raging cunt to me, and I still would not be a raging cunt to her. Because I chose not to do that anymore. Period. And she chose to keep doing it. And we recently, semi-recently, in the last 2 years, I felt that we had reconnected on a slightly more personal level because our grandmother died. This was a grandmother who was a human being. And this was one thing my sister and I could always agree on, was that my grandmother, our grandmother, was an amazing human being. And we lost her. And it was devastating. Even knowing that she was sick, even knowing that she was frail, it was still devastating because it was still a grandmother. And we had some real conversations about, like, our relationship with our grandmother and what she meant to us. And I wasn't expecting it to, turn into a Hallmark movie where suddenly we're friends again. But I thought, okay, I think we've come to a point that this is going to lead us to a peace about each other where we can just accept, we can both fully accept that we're different, we're never going to be close, and that's fine. And this is something I worked for myself for a very long time. I can't speak to her experience. But I thought, this was, Grandma would have preferred us to be close, but I think Grandma would be happy as long as we were both happy with the decision we made about how to deal with it. And I thought that's what had happened. I thought that we had been able to sort of bridge a gap and understand each other in a new way and come away from it feeling more understanding for one another, and just, having shared this experience of grief, we could just sort of keep the peace between the two of us. It was certainly my goal. It's been my goal for a long time to keep the peace, but this especially brought it home to me. Is my grandmother was our grandmother, and I keep saying it's our grandmother. That was the whole fucking thing. Our grandmother was an incredibly kind, compassionate, loving person, and I want to be like her. And this was a moment that I thought was healing and allowing us both to be like her, which I know is something we both say we strive towards. But then it turns out no. My sister's been creeping on my fucking Twitter the same she creeped on my live journal, the same she used to read my notebooks when I asked her not to, and getting pissed off because I said, hey, can you not do the thing? And then she did the thing and would come and yell at me because I had opinions she didn't like. So, that is the story of my sister and my live journal and my Twitter. And, I literally, at one point, she said, I need a piece of paper. And I had a boyfriend at the time that I was writing these ridiculous love letters to. And I was like, hey, if you could take a piece of paper from the back of the notebook, because I have a letter to the boyfriend at the front of the notebook that it's not your fucking business. And she left the room, and she came back in and started screaming at me because I said, could you please not do the thing? And then she did exactly what I asked her not to, and then came to yell at me because she didn't like what was in the letter that I had asked her not to read because it wasn't her fucking business. In the same way that I never invited her to my live journal because it wasn't her fucking business. In the same way that I never shared my Twitter because it wasn't her fucking business. And yes, I get it. The live journal was public. The Twitter was public. Why are you searching for things to be mad about? Get a fucking hobby. Do something that brings you joy. You're wasting your goddamn life. Because I don't fucking care if you don't like me. You haven't liked me in 20 years. Neat. I still think your husband's a piece of shit. We're not going to ever agree on your husband. I'm not going to agree with most of the decisions you make as a person. I was willing to be civil about these things, but you have to keep being a cunt. So, here you go. If you see this video, I hope you enjoy making a YouTube account so you can tell me what a piece of shit I am again. Because once again, Nobody knows who the fuck you are. So the only reason anybody knows who the fuck you are, the only way people see my sister in regards to me, is when she responds to me. And quite frankly, it's all fucking terrible. Anyway, yeah, so that's the story of my sister and me and, like, that whole fuckery, which I assume is going to continue on for the rest of my life until I die. Because I literally spent 10 years actively trying not to be a bitch. Because I didn't want to be a bitch. And now I'm at the point I don't fucking care. Like, I have carved out my own life and my own happiness, and that's what I'm doing. And she is finding ways to jam herself into it because she thinks I asked. I never asked. I don't care. Like, had she not popped up on my Twitter to have this whole little snit fit, this video wouldn't exist. And there's one person who is at fault for that snit fit, and it's not me. Alright.